Everybody, welcome. We have a special treat tonight. We have with us one of the newer legends in the world of whiskey. We have Dr. Pat Heist. And those of you who know anything about Wilderness Trail and know anything about his background, it's pretty fascinating. We're going to be talking about it a bit, but he is a PhD, plant pathology. He has a degree in microbiology. Before he started his distillery, and Dr. Pat, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, but before you started the distillery, you had a company called Firm Pro Solutions, where you were providing Firm Solutions, Firm Solutions, where you were providing yeasts, antimicrobials, and enzymes to the ethanol fuel industry and to the distilling industry. Am I correct about that?
That's right. And we had our best year ever last year, so we continue that business. We work with over 600 different distilleries.
That is wonderful. How was that transition going from providing materials to the industry to being an actual producer of the whiskeys in the industry itself?
Well, I mean, the thing about being a yeast provider is the yeast gets the blame for every problem that a distillery or a brewery has. So as a yeast provider, if you're going to be successful, you got to be ready to get that phone call of, hey, man, this damn yeast isn't working. And 99% of the time, the yeast is working fine, but there's a grain quality issue. You're not properly converting starch into fermentable sugars. There's bacterial contamination. There might be a raccoon stuck in the recirculation line. You never know what the hell's going on at a distillery. So we're like the first responders to a lot of those issues. And so, we over the years became troubleshooters. My business partner, Shane Baker, he's a mechanical engineer. So where my microbiology and biochemistry knowledge kind of dwindles off, his mechanical engineering picks up. And where we've worked with, I've personally been in over 1,000 distilleries on distress calls. You pretty much learn like what are the best ideas, what are the worst ideas. So at some point in our history of running that business, here we are taking phone calls from some of the most famous master distillers in the world, helping them with all their problems. And we're like, shit, man, we ought to have our own damn distillery. So we started Wilderness Trail back in 2012, started distilling in 2013. And, our intentions were it'd be really cool to have a bourbon brand. We're in Kentucky. We work with a lot of the big bourbon brands. But, having our own brand, we also do a lot of training. I'm up here in Louisville right now doing teaching for Moonshine University. So we do a lot of training for up and coming distilleries, existing distilleries. So when we first started Wilderness Trail, it was a good opportunity to have a production facility to where instead of whiteboarding it, being a lecture hall on how to do things, we had our own distillery. So lo and behold, 1 barrel a day operation 7 years ago. We've now, we do 220 barrels a day, 7 days a week. We are the 14th largest bourbon producer in the world and just became the 18th member of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So
that is one heck of an upward slope. I can imagine scalability.
Oh yeah,
must have been really important when you were building this stuff. But your experience already in industrial production with the yeast and the microbials and the enzymes probably helped you a lot with that.
Absolutely, and we work with. Fermentation is our kind of bread and butter. So, we work with fuel alcohol, beverage alcohol, and in beverage alcohol, you got distilled spirits. Under distilled spirits, you've got tequila, rum, vodka, bourbon whiskey, rye whiskey, Scotch and Irish whiskeys. I did a project last week for a person who was making menma, which is fermented bamboo shoots for ramen. So you never know.
Wow.
We fermented marshmallow bunnies. We fermented expired bakery goods. So there's really literally nothing in the fermentation arena that we haven't done. We do a lot of work with the non-alcoholic fermented beverages like kombucha and kefir, distilled vinegar, soy sauce, et cetera, et cetera. But most of our business is in alcoholic beverage production.
Okay, well, I got to tell you something from the comments and the laughs already. I have a hunch that if we had the time, we'd be talking more about fermented marshmallow bunnies, but we're not going to go there right now. Let's all go on to the first whiskey that we're going to be sampling here tonight, and you're going to tell us about it. So this is the bottle that is labeled in my chicken scratch in blue, WT1. Okay, WT1. This is a single barrel straight bourbon, 110 proof, 17B03, right? So,
Yep.
Dr. Pat, tell us what we're about to drink here.
So this is a single barrel. This is actually a barrel pick that we did. We've been referred to as the sweet mash disruptors. It's on the side of the bottle. This barrel pick we actually sold out of our distillery. And this is a barrel pick we did. This is single barrel strength. So we go into the barrel at 110 proof. So it's interesting that this came out after, let's see, this is 4 years, 5 months at the same proof that we put it into the barrel at. So those are a couple things about it. And based on the side, we always put a sticker on the side of any of our barrel picks that gives details like what was the age. This is 4 years, 5 months. The barrel is an independent stave, Cooper Select barrel. That was 18 to 24 month air dried wood. And that's with a number 4 char. This was stored in Rick House A, which is the first rick house we ever built. We have 13 rick houses on the property currently. This is the first one we ever did, which is a 2,200 barrel rick house, a very small. The warehouses we're building now, and we're filling one every 120 days, are 24,000 barrel houses. So this is in our smallest rick house, so it's kind of special. And the yeast strain we used was our FP1 that Firm Solutions markets.
Oh, okay. So you gave us a lot of, let me, quick time out. You gave us like a lot of information there. Okay. So who decides ultimately what that mix is going to be? So I just want to make sure everybody understands that on the side of the bottles, it says the age, it says the barrel, what kind of char is on it, what rick house, where it's in, and what yeast strain we're talking about. All right.
Yep.
So are you the person who decides this, or is there a team deciding this with you? How does that work?
Well, my business partner, Shane Baker, and I, we own both companies, Firm Solutions as well as Wilderness Trail. So, ultimately we're at the top of the chain, but we have a lot, like this is a barrel pick. So actually our staff, which we have over 60 people working for us who are highly organized and professional, and we involve them in these barrel picks as well. So this was kind of a staff pick of ours. And this is, again, single barrel strength. So everything in that bottle or in that glass is 100% what came out of the barrel with no alterations, no dilution, no filtering or anything.
And what about the mash bill and the mash bill that's in here?
Yeah. So our mash bills, anybody that drinks our whiskeys, here's the front of the bottle, the side of the bottle, whether it's a barrel pick or not, we have a little paragraph here that tells, was this done on a pot still or a column still? This was done on a, what in the hell's that here? Made from, I'm losing my vision here. This is our pot. This is pot distilled. So we've since moved on to column distillation. So this is pot distilled. It also lists the mash bill on the side, which is 64% corn, 24% rye, 12% malted barley. So anybody that gets a bottle of our stuff, whether it's a barrel pick or not, you can get all that information on the side of our bottle. So when we release that, we're highly transparent. We want everyone to understand everything that we do. And we were bourbon lovers before we ever started our distillery. So we want people to have all that information.
Got it. Now, tell us about those grains. Are those all local grains? How involved are you in the production of those grains, and also the malting of the barley that you use?
Yeah, so we don't grow any of the grains that we use for our whiskeys, but we do work closely with a local farm. It's called Caverndale Farms, and they're actually one of the last family-owned seed farms, so that hasn't been bought up by the big guys. And so they actually, since they're a seed farmer, they grow multiple varieties, but they keep their varieties separate because they're selling seed to other farmers. So what that does for us is it allows us every year, if we want to use the same varieties, we can use the same exact variety. So it limits the amount of consistency issues that we would have. So that's a big deal for us. If you just go out on the market and buy a number 2 yellow dent corn, you could get multiple varieties grown from multiple areas. And here we are buying from not only a family-owned local business, but one that can supply us with the exact specific varieties that we're looking for. So we get all of our corn, our wheat. Now we get our rye, which this has rye in it. Almost every distillery in the state of Kentucky uses rye in the recipe, but we're one of only a 2 or 3 that uses rye that's grown in the state. So that's another thing that kind of makes us a little bit different from other larger distilleries.
Got it. Tell us about your barrels.
So the barrels that we use, like for this independent stave, we use all for Wilderness Trail what are called Cooper Select barrels. Those are the wood is crafted from hand selected trees. The staves are cut before the barrels are ever made. Those staves are aged outdoors for 18 to 24 months.
Wow.
Which there's a lot of things that go on there. It's called deacidification. We're volatilizing tannins and different things that you don't necessarily want in the flavor of your bourbon. And then we do a number 4 char on those barrels. So most Kentucky bourbon distilleries use number 3 char and use barrels that are called Kentucky barrels that are 3 to 6 month air dried. We do 18 to 24 month air dried and do a number 4 char.
Got it. And do you do the charring and cooperage yourself, or are you contracting for that?
We buy those from Independent Stave out of Lebanon, Missouri.
Okay, got it. Nice. And what about your water source? How important is that to your process?
Well, the water is very important. And again, where we work with hundreds of distilleries from around the world, everybody's got their own water source and their own water story. We use municipal water from Danville. It's chlorinated water, which is limestone filtered. Everywhere in Kentucky, you're basically dealing with limestone water. So, a lot of people talk about the limestone and the calcium in the water as being a good thing, which, hate to blow it for anybody, but the grain has got more calcium than the water ever thought about having. So even if you use reverse osmosis water that doesn't have any nutrients in it, you're going to get a lot of those things that everybody brags about in the state of Kentucky for, in the grain. So, that's another thing. But we use good quality water. There's a lot of distilleries that there's distilleries that use lake water, well water, municipal water. And where we work with hundreds of different distilleries, we've never seen a situation where the water in a location precluded anyone from having a good flavored distillate. Got
it. Well, I got to tell you, it's working because, people are nodding. They're liking this. This does not drink like a cask strength to me. It's not, it's going down very nicely. It has has some spice, has some sweetness to it, and the heat is manageable without any water. So it's working. Now, do you typically drink it neat, or do you add water?
I always drink it neat. If I want to just kind of see how it opens up, somebody mentioned the question, Danville, California. Every state has Danville in it, at least according to my travels. I was checking into a hotel in Illinois, and I was 15 miles from Danville, Illinois, and they're looking at me like, you live in Danville? Why the hell are you getting a hotel here? There's some funny business going on. Say, hey, man, I'm in Danville, Kentucky. So, one thing about our whiskey, we're a sweet mash producer. So we don't do a sour mash process. So we don't incorporate any backset or the leftovers from previous distillation into our new batches. So what that does is we run at a higher pH or a higher basic, base, you look at basic and acidic, we run a more basic fermentation, which ends up in a higher pH distillate. And we feel like, just based on experience, again, we've only been operating for nearly 8 years, so we're still learning a lot. So a lot of things that I say are my opinion as a scientist based on the information we have today. My opinion may change 2 or 3 years once we collect more data, but our distillate is a higher pH on average than what would be from a sour mash distillate. So it just drinks smoother. So your comment about being that high proof, but it's still drinking really smooth, that's likely a big part of that is due to the higher pH of our distillate.
Okay.
Because we run a sweet mash process. We incorporate all fresh water every time we make mash. We don't incorporate any backset from a previous distillation.
Got it. Now I want to make sure people understand here that you're a teacher, okay? That you've been a college professor, and right now you said you're at a hotel. And what exactly are you doing at this hotel now? Tell us what this event is.
Yep, I'm at the Brown Hotel in Louisville, the place where the hot brown was invented. And I'm teaching at Moonshine University here in Louisville. It's a place where people who want to start distilleries go to learn about, hey, man, I mean, anybody, hey, I'm 2 years out from starting my distillery. Let me learn. And it's a survey course. So it's a 6-day class. I teach the first day of that class. I also do a 2-day advanced fermentation class here, which isn't taking place this week, but I'm here for the 6-day class. So I just got done today teaching. So I had 40 people in the class, and almost everybody in there is looking to start a distillery at some point. That's what I'm doing here. And I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Kentucky at the James Beam Institute, which also has a beer, wine, and distilled spirits program. My daughter's getting ready to graduate from that, actually. So
hey, congratulations.
She always hates when Dad shows up as a guest lecturer. She's like, "Oh my God, here we go."
I can imagine that could be embarrassing for her, but that's wonderful. Now you've been sounds like you've been in Kentucky your whole life, right?
Yep, I was born in Kentucky, and I've lived in different places in Kentucky my whole life. I've traveled the world, in firm solutions business as well as Wilderness Trail. So I get out a good bit, and I still haven't lost my hillbilly accent, but I spend most of my time here in Kentucky around the distillery and firm solutions.
It's funny you mentioned the accent, because I watched one of the podcasts. You've been on many podcasts, and you were joking around about your Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, that was on my TEDx talk.
Yeah, that's right. That was on the TEDx talk. That's right. That was awesome. We're talking about climate and stuff. All right, so let's move on to our second expression here. Our second expression is also a bourbon. This bourbon is 114 proof. On the bottle, it says Family Reserve, which is different. Okay, so if you can tell us a little bit about what we are about to drink and how it's different from the first one.
Well, actually, the first one should say Family Reserve on it. We just put that on all of our barrel picks, so it's a little bit different. I mean, what does Family Reserve really mean? It really doesn't mean anything. It just means we put Family Reserve on the bottle. So I think Willett did that, so we might have scooped that off of them. But we put that on. It was just kind of like personalizing a little more. I mean, these are barrel picks, and again, everything in this glass you're drinking here is exactly what came out of the barrel. No dilution, no filtration. So it's a single barrel at barrel strength. So again, this would have went into the barrel at 110 proof, and it came out at 114. The other one came out at exactly the same proof we put it into the barrel at. So and this is a wheated bourbon. The other one is a rye bourbon. Both of these recipes are exactly the same with respect to corn and malted barley. The first one we tried was 24% rye. This one we're drinking now is 24% wheat. So a good example of a wheated bourbon versus a rye bourbon made at the same distillery with all of the same ingredients and sourced from same farm, same distillation techniques, yeast strains, etc.
This is amazing. And again, it's got a little bit of heat, but again, it doesn't need the water.
Yeah, and for 114 proof, this particular wheater pick is extraordinary. I remember when I tried this for the first time, I went into the gift shop and I bought 6 bottles of it. Actually, I think I bought 12 bottles of it, and they're like, "That'll be $850." I'm like, "What the fuck, man? No, I get any kind of discount." So, but yeah, people that own distilleries actually have to still buy their whiskey. Just to let y'all know.
Okay, now that's something I just learned. I did not know that. That is.
I mean, we can sneak out a little bit every now and then, like, hey, I got a Glencairn on my desk. I'm not going to drink it all. I'll pour it into my little infinity bottle here, and you end up with a few bottles here and there like that. But technically, those are lab samples.
Yeah, could you do me a favor? Just can you repeat for us again the mash bill in this particular one, because we're getting some questions.
Yep, absolutely. So again, the mash recipe is always on the side of all of our bottles. This is 64% corn, 24% wheat, 12% malted barley.
Got it. Tell us about that malted barley.
Well, that's the only grain that we don't source from Kentucky. There's not a lot of barley grown in the state of Kentucky. So we actually buy that from a grain elevator out of Louisville, Kentucky. So we buy it in Kentucky, but it's actually barley that was purchased and malted in another state. And it's a company called Malt Europe. It's where basically every bourbon distillery in the state of Kentucky that I know of buys their malt from Malt Europe.
Got it. Got it. So tell me about what it meant to you and your company to be added to the Bourbon Trail.
Well, I mean, anybody who's a bourbon fan can probably just think in there, sit in their seats and think, if I had a distillery on the Bourbon Trail, that would be cool as shit. So that was my first thought that went through my mind. I mean, we started off on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour, and you're not eligible to get on the Big Bourbon Trail till you reach a certain amount of production, which we're currently the 14th largest bourbon producer in the world. So we definitely meet the requirements for our capacity and all that kind of stuff. But it's just really cool. I mean, like I said, born and raised in Kentucky here my whole life. It's just we're just proud as we can be. And we're bourbon fans, and I mean, and we don't work for Wilderness Trail. We own it. So we're in charge of everything that goes on there. It's really just been a amazing experience. And I mean, I was telling somebody today in the class, they're like, what do you do on your spare time? It's like, shit, man, I can't coming over here and teaching at Moonshine University is vacation. It's literally fun. So, I mean, when I take vacation, usually I'm looking, where are the bourbon bars where I'm going to be? Where's the distillery that's close by? Hell, if I can get somebody to drink our bourbon, or if I can meet somebody and have an interesting conversation with them about bourbon, and being an owner of a distillery. And again, normally I'm playing mystery shopper. I go into liquor stores, I sit at bourbon bars, and I'm not sitting here, hey, I'll Pat Heist on Wilderness Trail. I'm just sitting there drinking bourbon. And now I will facilitate, what do you think about Wilderness Trail? You ever had it? And just hear what they say, and including the bartenders. If you come in like I own the place, then it's going to be, they're either going to be trying to kiss your ass or give you information. I mean, I like to sit in the crowd and just be, just one of the people in the bar. And then if it ever gets to that point, you get some smart ass tries to outdo you on the information of bourbon, you might have to drop a little bit of, background on them. But
well, but I would think you're pretty recognizable to people in the industry by this point.
Yeah, well, even with a face mask on, it doesn't really help too much. So I was in a liquor store in Georgia in the height of COVID. I was actually on my way down to Florida to hang out with a bunch of people that had COVID. And I forgot to bring any Wilderness Trail with me. So I'm like, well, we sell in Tennessee, we sell in Georgia, so I'm going to be going through states. So I stopped at a bunch of liquor stores. And a lot of times whenever I stop at a liquor store that doesn't have our whiskey, it's almost just as good as one that does, because then I'm like, well, hey, I just moved in a block away from here, and I love Wilderness Trail, and I'm going to be buying it here all the time. So if you can just get it in here, let me know. And then I'll stop, But anyhow, awesome. I found it at a liquor store in Georgia, and I had a face mask on, and which actually said Slayer on it. That's my favorite band. So and my mom made that face mask for me. So I was in this liquor store, and I got 3 bottles of Wilderness. They had Wilderness stacked up to the wall in there, had barrel picks and everything. So I got 3 bottles, one of each of our stuff. I took it up to the counter, and the guy running the cash register, he was actually the owner. I didn't find that out till later, but he was like, oh, well, you're getting the good stuff. And so, oh, yeah, I love Wilderness Trail. About that time, somebody who was in the store said, Dr. Pat, and even spotted me with a face mask on. So next thing you know, we're out front of the building getting pictures made.
Right, of course.
And everything. And my girlfriend's sitting out in the car like, oh, my God, everywhere we go.
She probably is used to it by now, I would think.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
So I'm glad you brought up something about retailing. Are you currently available in all 50 states?
No, we're in 36 states right now.
Okay.
And we're in allocation in every state we're in except for Kentucky and California.
Okay. And internationally, you available in Europe and on Japan and other places?
Currently, we're in England and Germany and we're getting ready to be in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland.
Okay. Now, one question I have before we go into the rye, let's talk a little bit about availability, because obviously we're tasting here single barrel expressions. Okay. Many of us here, probably about 2/3 of us here, maybe 3/4 are Chicago based. So, you know, we shop, many of us shop at Binny's and Warehouse and all that stuff. I was actually introduced to your stuff several years ago by Brett Pantani, because Brett, we work with, a few of us work with Brett every year to stock a whiskey table as a fundraiser for a homeless shelter that we're involved with. And Brett always helps us with the selection. And that's where I first got introduced to Wilderness Trail, to your rye. And it's great stuff. But here we have single barrels. Okay. How frequently are these are the single barrels available at places like Binny's? And these two particular bourbons, are these available at Binny's or not? I know the rye is, because that was there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done multiple barrel picks with Binny's as well, and other Chicago locations. So our wheated bourbon is always single barrel. And now, most of the time, if you come across this at a store and it's not a barrel pick, it's going to be single barrel bottled in bond. So it's, the only difference is it's bottled in bond, so diluted to 100 proof.
Right.
Our high rye bourbon is sold as a small batch bottled in bond, but all of our barrel picks are offered at single barrel strength. So anytime you come across a barrel pick, and personally, if I go into a store and they got a barrel pick, I'm going to buy a bottle of it, because barrel picks are usually sweet. So, you know, I'm probably the single largest buyer of Wilderness Trail barrel picks in the universe. And I don't get a discount, just to let you know. But I hoard bourbon like a lot of other bourbon fanatics do.
You know, there are many people on here with rather significant selections. Some of them have them as their backgrounds here right now, too, which is pretty impressive. So let's go on to this rye. Okay, so I've been a fan of your rye for several years here.
Which this is a rye bourbon. Oh, you're going on to the rye whiskey.
Right, we're going on to the rye. Okay, yeah. So right now, so the third one we have here, now obviously you don't have this one with you right now. This is Settler Select Rye Whiskey, Family Reserve, 55% alcohol, 110 proof. And I think, Eric, I sent you that picture, right? If you could do me a favor and share that screen, if you have that available. You think you have that? Okay. So, and the code on this one, Dr. Pat, it's 15L21. Okay, 15L21. Okay.
Okay.
So can you, what can you tell us about this? We're about to taste this one here.
So the 15L21, what that signifies is that's the date that we barreled that bourbon. So 15 is the year, 2015. L is the month, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. That would be December. So December, what's the number after 20 something?
It's 15L21.
Okay, so that would be December the 21st, 2015 is when that would have went into the barrel.
Right, and then it says H19 at the end.
Well, that's probably refers to the shift or the batch. So there's additional suffix on there that kind of identifies, you know, what shift made it. That way, if we got a place of blame, if it wasn't any good, we can point to a certain shift, night shift, day shift. We run 24/7 at our distillery.
Got it. So you see here, we've posted for everybody the picture, okay, from the side of that bottle. So I want everybody to make sure they understand that. So you're telling us that this is on the side of all your bottles. They have all this information, right?
Yep. In our rye whiskey, that green label there is always bottled as single barrel strength. So we have never released any of our rye whiskey that wasn't single barrel strength. So there's no dilution, no filtration. So, and with a single barrel, you're going to expect, you know, little nuances from one batch to the next. But if it's a barrel pick, then, you know, the people picking the barrel are almost always do a great job. A lot of our single barrel, I mean, we try not to get too, you know, like we don't want to pick barrels that all taste the same for a single barrel. I'm a bourbon fan. So when I buy single barrel bourbon, I want there to be little nuances. So we just pick barrels and, hey, man, if it's 4+ years old, we're going to bottle it. And if it's got a little nuance to it, then it's going to be a little different. So, but barrel picks specifically are usually just guaranteed to be awesome because somebody picked that barrel out of a handful of barrels.
Got it. So let's see. So the mash bill in here, since I have the bottle of this in front of me, this one's 56% rye, 30 looks like 33% corn, and 11% malted barley.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, that's yeah. It's really sweet. Eric, you can take off that screen now. This is sweet. It's delicious. I mean, we're getting a lot of good comments on this thing. Yeah, nice spice. This is delightful. Good sweetness. Getting honey from it. To tell us about the fact that in your case here, so we've had many expressions from different distillers where they've been like 70, 80, 90% corn or 70, 80, 90% rye, like much higher for the core grain. Okay. You seem to be looking for a little bit more of a balance. Can you talk about that process and that decision process?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at, historically, what really made rye popular in the United States, I mean, in large, was rye that was sourced from MGP. And MGP makes a 95% rye, 5% malted barley. That's their mash bill on their rye whiskey. So a lot of the brands that came out, and some of them weren't saying that they were sourcing it. They actually said they had distilleries and different things. A lot of the rye on the shelves out there, just due to a lot of places sourcing their products from MGP, it's 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Now, being very operationally minded at our distillery, and we're a Kentucky-based operation, we make what we refer to as a Kentucky rye. It's got a little bit of corn in it. Most of the ryes on the shelf out there don't have any corn. So we add 33% corn to ours, and that corn oil helps mitigate foaming in the fermentation process. So there are like process reasons why we formulate our mash bills. There's flavor reasons why we formulate our mash bills. But a lot of that really excellent, what I like in traditional ryes, is present in this, even though it's only 56% rye.
Got it. And when you're by yourself, a fireside, listening to Slayer, are you picking a rye? Or are you picking a bourbon?
I drink mostly our bourbons, and I'm interchangeable between our wheated bourbon and a rye bourbon. And I'm a big bourbon fan. So I'll be drinking New Riff and Little Old Granddad, and some Weller and some Larceny and Maker's Mark's, one of my favorites. Woodford Reserve. I mean, hell, I could keep listing off, all night long. But my bourbon collection is extensive. I've got a little bit of everything. We work with a lot of the other distilleries. We're bourbon fans. We love bourbon. We love rye whiskeys and shit, man. We're drinking all kinds of stuff. But our stuff, I drink mostly our bourbons. And then since the rye whiskey is always bottle or barrel strength, single barrel, I probably drink less of that just because it is higher proof. And, I mean, can't get trashed every night like to, but I'm almost 50 years old now, so I got to start.
Hey, I'm 55. I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50, so I know what you're talking about there. Definitely. I want to just ask you one other question just before I open it up to everybody here. Can you tell us a little bit about the status of your distillery and tours in the time of COVID and the time that we're coming out of COVID?
Yeah. So hell, even during the peak of COVID, we remained open. We just really, and again, we don't have a team of lawyers sitting there trying to determine our every move. Me and my business partner, we just got together and like, what's safe that we can do. We at one time we had to limit the amount of people on the tour. We made sure everybody's signing waivers, and people who are, nowadays, if you're unvaccinated, you need to wear a mask. But we re-engineered our tours to include more outdoor stuff. So we did our tastings outdoors. We incorporated a trip to one of the barrel warehouses, so you're kind of walking outdoors for a good portion of the tour. So it really never fazed us. I mean, I would almost argue that COVID was a good thing for us, because as a growing distillery, here we are in allocation in almost every state. So, okay, what happens when you lose 38% of your business of on-premise sales and, people drinking at bars and restaurants and tasting rooms? Well, that just allowed us, we're like, okay, well, these other states that we were wanting to go into that we didn't have enough whiskey to support, it just allowed us to go into those other states. If we were already saturated across the internationally, then we would have felt a big hit on all that. But during COVID, we were able to just, okay, let's just we're selling less in every state. That allows us to go into a couple more states that we want to go into. And again, we're in 36 states now, and we're in allocation in every one of those states except for Kentucky and California. The other thing, hand sanitizer, where we have a relationship with a lot of big, fuel alcohol distilleries, we were able to facilitate the movement of alcohol from those places who were suffering because fuel prices were really low. And we were able to help a lot of our customers who were having issues with their tourism taking a dive. And shit, some of them made millions of dollars on selling hand sanitizer. And we just facilitated. We didn't really, we're doing fine on our own. So we just opted to help our customers. And in the same time, we're helping schools and hospitals and first responders. We generated probably 150,000 gallons of hand sanitizer at exactly the time when everybody was hurting. People were saying, I'm not coming to the hospital working if we don't have hand sanitizer. And the other distilleries were like, hey, man, our attorney said we can't do this right now. And we're just like, screw it, man. Let's do it. This is the right thing to do. Let's get her done. And so we were the first big distillery to come on the scene and aid in those types of things. So
you guys did. It was very helpful what distilleries like you guys did. And I remember we were talking to Maggie Lerman from the Craft Distillers Association, and she said that they had to become experts in this overnight because so many distilleries didn't know what to do and how to do it, and they had to get information out to everybody, real quickly, so that must have been crazy. So I don't want to monopolize this. You and I could go on for hours. What I want to do right now is, Eric, do you have any particular questions for Dr. Pat?
Actually, simple question. What's got you most excited for the second half of the year?
Say that one more time.
What has you most excited for the second half of 2021?
Well, probably the fact that we're actually able to travel again, which now that we got, COVID outbreaks going left and right, I don't know how long that's going to last. But that's one of the most exciting things. I'm getting ready to go to California here in a couple of weeks. We actually just had a major bourbon festival. The New Orleans Bourbon Festival just got canceled, so that's disappointing. Got some travel lined up for Europe, those kind of things. And again, it's just kind of due to the opening up of everything. I wasn't even allowed to travel to Europe, and now we're able to do that. So that's kind of exciting for us. The other thing is, second half of 2021, our first barrels that we made are going to become 8 years old. So we're getting into, we got bottle and bond, all the whiskey we've been drinking nights, between 4 to 5 years old. We also have a 6 year, and we're getting ready to be into 8 year stuff. So that's probably one of the most exciting things that we're doing, I would say.
Wow, that's great.
Great. So Dr. Pat, I want to give one of our ringers one of the first questions here, if you don't mind. Sure. Becca Katzman. Becca has a PhD. I think, Becca, Becca, can you unmute, please?
I just did.
Remind me, what's your PhD in again, Becca?
Epstein-Barr virus, the kissing disease.
Which is a herpes virus.
Yes. See, he knows his stuff.
Yes, he does.
Well, so and so, in my lab where I got my PhD, there were a bunch of guys who used to, they did some home brewing and had their own yeast strains they would talk about that they'd store in their -140, in the -140. And so you said that you were supplying yeast to so many people that you decided to go into your own business. I was curious, what was your research? Was it your own personal stocks that you had going on in the lab, or were you studying yeast and that's what got you into it, or took you to the professional route?
Yeah, so at the time we started Firm Solutions, I was actually a medical microbiology professor teaching lectures on things like herpes viruses and what you're mentioning there. And I started consulting for companies that sold yeast to distilleries, and they're building multi-million-dollar homes for themselves, and I'm getting $100 Christmas bonus. I'm like, let's see here. I think I could probably do this on my own. So I got together with my business partner, who me and him met playing in a rock band back in the 90s. He's a guitar player. I'm a lead singer. I still got a rock band. If anybody's interested, look up Zella May on Spotify or Facebook, and you can see some of our videos. We actually got a show next week in Glasgow, Kentucky. I had to do something to make my mom proud. I figured I'd be a lead singer in a rock band. But, you know, we just, I mean, in terms of how do we get our yeast strains, you know, yeast is a natural organism. So if there's a strain, like if you wanted to go buy a Firm Solutions yeast strain, you could buy it and start remanufacturing it yourself. But the thing is, if you're going to be competitive with other companies in the world on selling yeast, you need to make about 80 tons at a time of any given strain. So that's just not in the wheelhouse of most people. And so, you know, we started, you know, with different yeast strains. I mean, you don't have to look any further than the substrates that are used to make alcohol: barley, corn, strawberries, grapes, plums. Wherever you can make a mash, and you'll spontaneously get yeast grown out of it. So we started off, hell, we went to the store and bought cantaloupe and grapes and everything else. We made different mashes, and we started culturing the yeast out of there. And then once you have a yeast strain, you got to identify, you know, by species level. Is it Saccharomyces cerevisiae? Is it capable of finishing all the sugar? Is it a top fermenter, a bottom fermenter? What's the attenuation? And then you can start, what's the flavor profile? What esters does it produce? And you start categorizing them. Hey, this yeast would be a good one for beer. This one would be good for fuel alcohol because it ferments at a high gravity, produces a lot of alcohol. So we started doing that. And then as well, you know, I mean, if you look at other successful yeast companies, if they got a strain better than us and it's a natural strain, hell, I'll buy some of theirs and I'll start making it myself. So there's a lot of different strategies that go into. We have over 9,000 different yeast strains. Many of those we cultured from customers who were having contamination issues. So not only do we have the yeast that everybody's using to make their alcohol, we've also got thousands of yeasts that were wild yeast or contaminants of those fermentations. So if anybody ever wants to do a research project, we got about 50 years worth of research that needs to be done on the 9,000 strains that we don't know anything about that we have. And then we got.
So how do you control the natural yeast that's with the grains versus the yeast you want to work with?
Well, when you make bourbon and other whiskeys, there's a high heat process in the mashing process. We're cooking at 185 degrees Fahrenheit for nearly 2 hours. So that eliminates most all of anything. And then you're adding inoculum at a very high concentration. So we're inoculating with 22 billion cells per gallon of what we want to go in there. So any just, you know, transient yeast that happen to end up in there, they're just not very well matched to compete with what we're intentionally put in there.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Great questions, Becca. I want to ask one of our other ringers, David Weil. I see David taking copious notes. David, could you do me a favor and can you unmute, please? Okay. So, David, you're a chemist, right?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have any particular questions for Dr. Pat? Because I've seen you taking notes like crazy during this.
Sure. Well,
I'm going to stump this asshole quick.
Well,
go ahead and try it.
I'm not going to scoop you, of course. But what was interesting is you were talking about the different charring, you know, your 3 versus your 4 char, and also the aging of the wood, right? And so I'd be interested to see what you've had some of the distillate that's gone in, and looking at those, doing that comparison in age and seeing, you know, how the flavor profile would change. So that's what I do is mass spec. And so I'm always looking at how we can use the technology, like you mentioned, perfect example was by sourcing the same seed, right? From the farm, the same thing over and over, so you can get that. But of course, when we go to the barrels, that's another change. And so that was wondering if you're using any chemical identification methods right now, or do you even see this in the industry?
So the general chemical profile that most big distilleries will run is called the TTB series. And like there's a company called it's called BDAS out of hold on a second, let me decline this phone call here. Somebody a distillery needing help. Sorry guys, I'm on podcast. So so the barrels that we source, they're and again, we're a new distillery, so we're still trying to figure this stuff out. But there's a test called the TTB series that a lot of distilleries run just when you're trying to get a general consensus of heads, hearts, and tails, which heads are your lower boiling chemicals. Your hearts are mostly what you want to have in the bottle. The tails are the higher boiling point chemicals that come up like propyl alcohol, those kind of things. And so, going into the barrel, we have a certain barrel entry proof that we're going in at. We go in at 110. The highest allowable by law for making bourbon is 125. So there are chemicals in that barrel that some of those chemicals are more water soluble. Some of those chemicals are more alcohol soluble. So there's a science that goes into, why are we putting bourbon into the barrel at the proof we're doing? Because at the end of the day, if we put in at 125 proof, we would use a lot less barrels in a year. So there's an expense that goes on to barreling it at that lower proof. But again, we're trying to use science to guide us of why are we going in at that proof. The other thing you got to consider is, so over time in the barrel warehouse, and again, this is largely driven by temperatures, which in Kentucky, we have 4 very distinctive seasons. Those barrels are cold in the winter, they're hot in the summer. So when the liquid is hot, it expands and it sinks into that wood. When it cools down, it contracts back in. So that helps with the extraction process. But the temperature differential, there are chemical reactions that are occurring over time, like alcohols condensing with organic acids to form esters, for example. There's evaporative loss that is occurring over time. That is going to result in concentration of those flavors in the barrel and also loss of that product. So every year we estimate we're losing about 2 to 3% of the volume in each of those barrels. So all those things together kind of go back to, and again, the reason why we do a more extended air dry is it releases more things like tannins, I mentioned before, that we don't necessarily, it would take time to outrun those. So we start with a more intensively seasoned wood for our barrels, which helps us to rid of the tannins and different things, but also the evaporative loss that occurs over time, the chemical reactions that are occurring over time. So all these things together go into, what, and again, a lot of times when you're making decisions on something that you have never done before, I mean, you're basing it, it's just, we're scientists. So we're in search of the truth. What we do today is based on the knowledge that we have today. But as we learn little by little, we change what we do because we're improving on, using the scientific method to move forward. And, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of some information relative to our decisions about barrels and how we do things differently than other distilleries.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. That was a great question and a great answer. So I have a few other questions I can ask, but Eric, do we have any specific questions at this time from the group?
Nobody's raised their hand yet.
Ariel Eisenberg hasn't asked a question.
Yeah,
there we go. There we
go.
go.
Okay.
All right. Eisenberg and Nolan.
Is my volume okay? It's not too loud, right?
This is good.
That was your first question.
Yes.
Second,
Next.
what's your favorite color? So how often do people misjudge you because of your beard?
Well, I actually would prefer to be misjudged at first glance, and that way I can come back with a reign of terror if I need to. But you know, I usually don't worry about that kind of stuff. People, you know, people have opinions about people with accents like I've got. People got opinions about people with beards like I got. But come to our distillery and you'll see why I'm not worried about any of that. So,
Thank you.
It's good to be the king.
yeah. And it's good to be the king when everybody thinks you're not. And then you come up and bite them quick if it needs to happen. But normally, like I said, I don't know. We're not big. You know, we don't brag about what we do. We just, I mean, literally, like I said, we're so fortunate to be in the situation that we're in, being some of the biggest bourbon fans on the planet and be in the position that we're in. I mean, we just try to every day count our blessings and spread around that knowledge as much as we can. And instead of being stuffed up about it, you know, just, I mean, I love doing it. I mean, like I said, I do this on vacation. I don't even take vacation. I just work all the time because it feels like a vacation.
That's awesome. Great. Michael Nolan, please unmute.
Dr. Pat, first off, thank you very much for joining us tonight and speaking to us about your distillery. Some fantastic whiskeys, really enjoyed them. You mentioned earlier that Wilderness Trail has become one of the larger distilleries in Kentucky. Are you contract distilling for other people now, or is everything you're producing going into barrels just for Wilderness Trail?
No, we do a hefty bit of contract production. Okay. And the good news about that's get paid today to make it next week. So, you know, we're on track to make about 65,000 barrels this year at Wilderness Trail. And about 25,000 of those barrels are Wilderness Trail barrels, and about 40,000 barrels are contract production. So that's actually what supports a lot of the growth. You know, if you come on site there, you're like, man, how in the hell do these guys build 13 $3 million warehouses here? It's because we do the contract production. So that pays a lot of the bills now, and it allowed us to expand to the size that we're at now. And it's the reason we expanded to the size we're at now. And, you know, it just helps support our future growth, and also allows us to little by little, we take over more and more of that capacity that was set aside for contract production. And, you know, eventually we will have the majority of our production will be off of Wilderness Trail. Now, we take a lot of pride in making whiskey for the other brands that we support, and some of those people are heavily relying on us, and we've been making for them for over 4 years. So we'll most likely continue to do a good bit of a contract production going forward because we're supporting those other brands.
So for those contracts, are you doing specific mash bills for that client, or are you got kind of like standard mash bills that you're using?
We have, like, some of our clients who want us to make whiskey for them are investors. Like if any of you all want to take some of your retirement money and put it into barrels, we can do that for you. And if you're unsure about, or if you know, hey, I'm not taking this to the bottle, I just want to put my money in barrels and I want to make money on my money, then you might say, well, just go ahead and make your mash bill. And hell, we might buy that barrel off you in 2 to 4 years for double what you paid to have it made. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways of looking at it. And, you know, we run it a lot of different ways. I mean, like I said, we have investors who are buying barrels that know they're going to take it to a brand, and we'll do custom mash bills, or even somebody who isn't going to take it to a brand. If you want a certain mash bill, wheated bourbon versus a rye bourbon, you want, you know, 55% corn versus 73% corn. Those are decisions. I mean, if you're buying the barrels, we have that flexibility. And where we've got 2 distilleries on site, we can make batches that produce 10 barrels a batch. We can make batches that make 60 barrels a batch. So we don't mind switching up that mash bill based on what our customers want. And that's a flexibility that gives us a lot more business, because a lot of the other big contract manufacturers, they're like, hey, these are our 3 mash bills. You have to have a minimum of 300 barrels to get in. So, you know, we're just kind of supplying a demand that existed based on the current climate of what the other contract producers do.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Then we have Josh Eisenberg and then Paul Barrett. So Josh, please unmute.
All right, thanks. This has been great. I was curious, are you, how are the yeast strains that you're using in the 3 different expressions that we tasted today different, or are they the same strain? You're just changing up the process a little bit.
Those would all be the same strain. Back in the day when we made these, we were using all one strain, and that's our Firm Pro 1, or it's called FP1. That's what strain was used to make all 3 of these. And a lot of times we get a question of like, hey, I'm making my bourbon with this strain, but I'm getting ready to make a rye whiskey. What strain do you recommend? It's like, go ahead and just use the same strain. We sell about 9 different strains as distiller strains. And what we find is if somebody's going to make rum, if it doesn't say the rum on the label, then they're like, well, it's not for rum. So we tend to not put labels on our yeast. It's like, this is a good distiller strain. You can use it for any distilled spirit you want to use it for. And I think there's been a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors by, you know, not dissing on our competition too badly. But, you know, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors of this is a vodka strain. Well, that doesn't mean it can't be used to make whiskey. So we just try to be honest with people. Now that we got our own distillery, and we're the only yeast supplier that I know of that has their own distillery. So it's like, what are you taking advice from them on? They don't even have their own damn distillery. And I guarantee if they did, their opinion would be different than it is now. But all of our yeast strain, we have 9,000 different yeast strains, but we only sell about 10 of those to distilleries. And it's because we have evaluated those and characterized those as being excellent for distilled spirits production. So you can make a rum with it. You can make a whiskey with it. You can make agave spirits. You can make vodka with it. And once you establish a baseline with one particular yeast strain, then you can switch to another one. And then you can, for yourself, evaluate what is that doing for me? And so that's kind of the advice that we give is, you know, don't be hard and fast. You have to use this one if you're making this. It's like that. The fact is you don't have to. Now, beer strains versus distiller strains. Like in a beer, you're drinking the end product of fermentation. You make wine, you're drinking the end product of fermentation. So no matter if your fermentation goes like you thought it would, you still got the same number of glasses of beer in there. Now, maybe nobody will buy it because it tastes like shit. But, you know, those are things that if you want to leave a little sugar behind, that's a good deal in beer, because when you're drinking the end product of fermentation, you might want it to be a little sweeter. If we leave sugar behind, that's money out the window that goes out to cattle feed that we should have made alcohol from. So we're selecting yeast strains that don't leave behind any sugar. So those are in temperature tolerance. If you're making lager beer, you're using the yeast that's ferment between 35 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. We're fermenting at 85 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit with the intention of finishing all the sugar. So it's really kind of apples to oranges.
That's super
Beautiful.
interesting. Thank you so much.
Great answer. So I have to point out that we're at 8 o'clock here. Is it okay if we have 2 more questions, Dr. Pat?
Yeah.
Okay. So next question is Paul Barrett, and then we're going to go on to Ruth and Jonathan after that. Then we're going to wrap it up. So Paul, go for it.
That's funny that you said question non-plural.
Yeah, coming from somebody who has a cat on his face right now.
Oh, crap. That's still there?
Yes, it is. I love that you didn't even know that it was still there. This is hilarious. Leader, I hope you're taping this.
Oh, this is on the video.
Awesome.
I'll put it back on after I ask the questions. So actually, thanks so much for this conversation. You've answered half of the questions that I wanted to ask just through speaking to what you were talking about already, including the beer yeast question that you just answered. So there goes that one. But I'll go back to one of my originals, and this is, you know, perhaps a little bit funny. Take with it what you will, but you mentioned earlier multiple distilleries or multiple setups and everything, and both pot and I'm assuming column still. But if you really want flavor in whiskey and you want to taste your whiskey, isn't pot still just better, period?
Well, that seems to be the general consensus, and a lot of people who believe that are places that's only ever ran a pot still, you know. So that's something else that kind of, you know, where we work with hundreds of distilleries, we have a confidence level because we know, I mean, hell, half the great bourbon in the United States is made on column stills. You can't argue with the Scotch and Irish whiskey producers, which are mostly making on pot stills. I mean, when you look at, you know, same thing with, hey, I've got a distillery that's always had 1,000 gallon fermenters. Now I want to expand. Can I buy one 10,000 gallon fermenter, or do I need to buy 10 1,000 gallon fermenters? You know, I don't think the yeast really gives a damn about, you know, any given yeast cell. It's just kind of in its own little 1 nanometer of a area, or 1 micron or 10 microns, whatever it is. I don't really think they're sitting here discussing, are we in a 500 gallon fermenter, or are we in a 20,000 gallon fermenter? Are we in a pot still, or are we in a column still? The vapor probably doesn't really care where it's at, you know, and certain vapor temperatures equate to certain proofs. Now, the way that you make your cuts on a pot still, and if you're just generalizing pot stills, well, a 10 gallon pot still, I'm going to have to be meticulous about making my cuts. If I get it to a 500 gallon, 1,000 gallon pot still, I can be a little more liberal with taking those cuts and making good decisions. But again, if you know how to make those cuts, which is all based on flavor, temperature of your vapor going to the condensers, and then, you know, on a column still, your cuts are made kind of automatically, because that mash only spends about 50 to 90 seconds in the column, whereas that mash the beer spends hours in a pot still. So of course you're going to hit higher temperatures. You're going to have more of a potential for tails to come over in a pot still than you will in a column still. But at the end of the day, the way you manage those cuts is all based on physics and, you know, vapor temperatures and those kind of things. And, you know, where we do a lot of barrel picks at our distillery, it was really nice once we started getting into 4+ year old columns distillate, because we could put it in a barrel pick right alongside of our pot distillate, and we get just as many people picking the column as we did our pot. So all the whiskey that we've had tonight is pot distilled, just coincidentally. Now, again, if you pay attention to that side label that lists our mash bill, it says pot distilled on there. But nowadays, most of the bottles that I'm seeing available at stores say column distilled. So you'll see that language changing, and you can kind of draw your own conclusions. And again, where our stuff, a lot of it's single barrel, you're going to expect little differences anyway. So we haven't had like oh my God, we went from pot to column still. This is totally different. And again, it's because we managed it very carefully and made sure that our proofs coming off the still and our production, everything remained very static.
Well, no, in rum production, they actually blend a lot of pot still and column still together for a lot of the blended rums. Do you think there's something to that, or do you think it really is kind of, and I think what you're alluding to is it's a matter of temperature, pressure, and time, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And it may not matter exactly what the still is, as long as you're getting, you know, maybe there's a pressure and time component as well as the temperature, but it's really about bringing it out of the still when it's been, you know, whatever, right?
Well, you know, having worked with a lot of different distilleries, and you hear these things, they're like, well, why do you do that for? And you really get to digging in. Again, a lot of times when we visit and work with distilleries, we're on a troubleshooting mission to solve a problem. So it's like going to the doctor. You got to pull your pants down sometimes. So a lot of times it's like, why the hell do you blend your pot distillate with your column distillate? Well, we started our distillery with a pot still. Then we incorporated a column because we needed more alcohol production. And so we blended them to try to ease everybody over to the column distillate. It's kind of like, you know, how come grandma cuts the piece of ham in 2 pieces and puts one in this pot, one in that pot? Because the pots ain't big enough for a whole ham, you know. And why does she do it that way? It's so delicious. Well, that's because her pots ain't the right size. So a lot of people, and again, you look at distilleries that's been operating for decades or centuries, they've got some things that they do that we point out that doesn't make a damn bit of sense. And they're like, well, I'm not going to be the one to change it. You know, I'm not, you know, Jim Beam will come back in his grave and kick my ass if I change that. So, you know, there's a lot of that goes on too. It's just people have done it that way. And then you ask the question, have you ever done it the other way? What if you just took the stuff off the column and bottled it and you got the stuff off the pot? And then they start scratching their head like, shit, I don't know what would happen. I don't know. You know, so a lot of it's just tradition and what people have done. And again, we're trying to look at things very scientifically and not let folklore and everything get in the way of making smart scientific decisions.
Yeah,
Well, I
but
think
the
that's what's
folklore.
so interesting, and thank you so much for this talk, because that's a unique perspective. Given a lot of what we see is, well, we've done it this way, we've always done it this way, and we like the result. So this has been fascinating. Thank you.
By the way, I love the folklore of and the vision of the ghost of Jim Beam coming back to kick your ass. I think that would almost be an honor in my mind, you know, to be that important that the ghost of Jim Beam would come and kick your ass. So Jonathan, we're giving you the last question here.
Great, thanks, Dr. Pat. I appreciate it. It's raining cats and dogs here, so if you hear a little background noise, it's because of the rain. I'm outside. You give me a lot to chew on here, and my questions do a lot with flavor. And, you know, you talk about, that's why we've always done things. So I talked with the guys from Three Thieves Winery. They do everything by the chemists, and they balance it all out. And there's always something left. It doesn't kind of fill the bill. So it's a 2-part question. How much of the flavor is really about experience? And then also you talked about pH, and you talked about wood, and you talked about different grains. How much of the flavor and mouthfeel is from all that? I don't think anyone before has talked about the way you guys do the pH. So thanks so much again for being here.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very detailed and kind of a difficult question. I mean, I can give you my opinion, but those are all things. It's such a multifactorial thing. I mean, you've got the starting ingredients, you've got how those ingredients are processed. You know, in our case, we're milling grain. You know, what's the average particle size of those grains? What would happen if we had a larger particle size versus a smaller particle size? We cook at a lower temperature than a lot of other distilleries cook at. You know, the type of yeast we use, the length of time that the fermentation proceeds, what proof are we coming off the still? What proof are we going into the barrel? What type of barrel are we using? What is the location of that barrel in a given warehouse? What is the orientation of that warehouse? Does it face east to west or north to south? Does that barrel get the prevailing sun in the morning or the sun in the afternoon? Is it in the aisle and it doesn't get any sun? There's so many factors that go into all this. You know, I think when you start to act like you know exactly what's going on, you make an idiot out of yourself pretty quick, because there's so many things that need to be considered. I mean, I don't know that even in our lifetime we would be able to accurately answer that question, because there's so many different factors. We're just doing the best we can at, well, we know what we're making is good, but why it's good, you know, it's just kind of one of those things to where I think in a few years, every year that goes by, you know, even studying the contaminating organisms that are in those batches, which hardly anybody's doing, you know, we're learning little by little, oh, wow, this particular contaminant is what contributed that particular note. And when you look at, you know, what's in your recipe, you got the water, the grain, the yeast, the process. Well, nobody's even considering what contaminating organisms they got in there. And everybody's got contamination to some degree. We try to mitigate it as much as we can, but you're always going to have a little bit of that. And so that's a question or a group of questions that we just have to have more experience to be able to answer and not be just blowing smoke.
That was beautiful. That's wonderful. So, Dr. Pat, as you can probably tell, we could go on for hours here. We've all got so many great questions. I've got so many more, but we're not going to do it out of respect for everybody's time. What I'd like everybody to do now is, if you are so inclined, please pour yourself a little bit more of a dram. I am going back to the rye. Damn, I love that stuff. I'd like everybody also to please unmute. Everybody, please unmute. Take a second to do that. Everybody, please unmute. And everybody, please join me in saying cheers and thank you very much to our special guest, Dr. Pat Heist. Thank you so much, sir. Cheers.
Dr. Pat.
Yes.
Bye.
you.
Dr. Pat,
so
this
much.
has been
Thank you, Dr. Pat.
this has been wonderful. Do you have any final words for us before we turn off the recording?
Well, anybody that's got any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I think if you did a Google search on Pat Heist email, you'd probably find it. And
I've got your contact info. I've got the contact, so they can go through me on that.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Always happy to help, and I'm just as big a bourbon fan as anybody else. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much again, everybody. Cheers and thank you.
Cheers and thank you.